Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So, the weather here in the UK has definitely taken a turn. Winter is on its way. Way too cold for a t-shirt. So, what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, we're going to have a go at the first winter scene of the year and this snow scene with a stream. So before we start, I just thought you might like to see this. It was sent to me from my publishers. My book being published in Spanish. Aquarela. Obviously, being fluent in Spanish, I could check it all. Anyway, enough of that. Come and join me and we'll paint this snow scene step by step together. Today's materials, my paper is some lovely ash. It's a rough textured finish, 300 GSM, 140 pounds. It's 100% cotton. It's on a block so it won't need stretching, but of course any decent watercolour paper will do. And my colours today, and there's just 4 of them: cadmium yellow, French ultramarine blue, burnt sienna and a little touch of dark steam purple. I'm also using some white gouache, and my brush is a large Harke, and from my range 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round, and my trusty number 3 rigger. And here's the pencil sketch, which as always is free to download from my website, a link in the description below. Right, before we start, a quick lesson on mixing French ultramarine with burnt sienna. Perfect for those lovely neutrals. So adding just a touch of burnt sienna will give you beautiful deep blues. Add in a little more and you'll get those lovely neutral cool greys. More will give you these warm greys. Then of course even more, some gorgeous browns, very much like a burnt umber. And you can see that when these are dry, a lovely selection of neutrals with a touch of granulation and separation. And we'll come back to these mixes later. And in fact, I painted this Austrian castle just using 2 colours, cobalt blue and burnt sienna. Link above if you haven't seen the tutorial. Off we go, and using my large Harke, I'm completely wetting the whole sheet of paper. Then straight away, using my flat brush, I'm painting in this lovely goldy colour made up of cadmium yellow and the burnt sienna, leaving that gap of light bang in the middle. And it's important this goes in while the paper is still wet. Add in a little touch of burnt sienna just in the corners here, and continuing with a very light wash here in the stream. Then drying my brush off and lifting out the colour here in the 2 large trunks. Then I'm painting into all the snowbanks here a very light wash of ultramarine blue. Not too many brush strokes here or it'll go green. And here and there, still wet in wet, I'm painting in a little touch of the dark Sardine purple. If you haven't got dark Sardine purple, any purple will do. Now this is just a base wash, so I'm painting it very loosely and I'm not worried if the paint seeps over my pencil lines. It's just neutralising the white paper. And again you can see I'm putting in little dabs of purple here and there, but don't overdo it. Right, so I'm now letting that totally dry and I'm going to paint in these distant trees with my first grey mix. As you can see, this is heavily blue biased. And to suggest it's way in the distance, I'm painting it with a very light value and just softening the top with some clean water to give it a fuzzy outer focus edge. Now for all of these snowbanks, I'm painting in with clean water first and then dropping in the shadow along the bottom edge. This way I'll get a hard edge to suggest the bank below and then a soft edge along the top. But for these banks in the distance I'm painting with a much lighter value. And I'm only using mixes of French ultramarine and the dark Sardine purple. And for the first time here, I'm dabbing in a little touch of one of those neutral greys mixed from the French ultramarine and burnt sienna. And all the other banks here I'm treating in exactly the same way, wetting first, then putting the shadow on the underside. And on the odd bank here, I'm dropping in a little bit of that grey. And as we get to the foreground here, all these washes are becoming that little bit stronger. And with all these snow-covered rocks, I'm re-wetting again, then making sure the darker values go towards the bottom and the lighter at the top. Next for the trees, and I'm coming in with a really dark, nice neutral grey. And to keep with that sunset or sunrise sort of vibe, I'm keeping all these colours fairly muted. The last thing we want to see introduced is some green. Now with my number 12 brush, I'm using the dry brush technique by keeping the brush nice and flat to the paper and picking up its texture. I've also added in more burnt sienna here to warm up this grey as we move closer towards the sun. Next, I've switched to my number 6 brush and I'm just painting in the odd little suggestion of this fir tree. Nice little pointy shapes. And exactly the same over on this side with the warmer values as you move towards the sun. So once that's totally dried, I'm just thinking I could do with a little more of that gold colour sitting behind the trees here. Next, I'm taking a piece of candle wax and just lightly dabbing here on this trunk. And this is to suggest some snow which has been blown up onto the tree. Next, with my number 12 brush, I'm painting in a really rich, creamy, dark mix of the grey, as I want this to stand out against the tree behind. And you can see here where that wax resist is really working a treat. And less dark at the bottom of the trunk here where there's a build-up of snow. And the same colour here for these smaller trees and trunks in the distance. Now with this tree, although it's quite subtle, I'm painting in a much warmer grey as we move towards the sun. And this tree in the distance, very pale and goldy colour. And I'm strategically placing these trees so I get a good area to reflect them in the water below. You always need to be thinking ahead. And if I can, I always like to show a variety of tree shapes. This one here where the branches are all fanning out from a central point. And with snow scenes like this where I've got big areas of snow, I always like to have a few little saplings poking out through the snow. It just helps to break it up a little bit and help with the sense of scale. Now for this big tree here, and then again a really dark value along this left hand side. Now the idea here isn't that the right hand side has got a highlight on it from the sun, because obviously the sun is on the opposite side, but this is really just to give the impression of snow being blown up against the side of the tree. So I'm breaking up this edge with a really nice crusty line, using some dry brush and also dropping in some clean water to get some soft edges. And a little bit of vegetation down here. And I've switched to my number 3 rigger. Thank you for these really fine spindly details. And back to my number 6 here for these fence posts. And just try not to make them look too perfect. One quick stroke if you can. Leave plenty of gaps. Rigger again here. Just try not to labour over it, just quick as you can. Perhaps this is just a little barbed wire that's fallen down over the years. And this could be a tree trunk that's fallen over. And I'm just edging the bank here with the little touches of the rock showing through. Now you may be wondering what the photo reference was for this. Well, it was taken from a number of pictures, but most of it is from my imagination. A little bit of dry brush here to create some texture. Next I'm taking some French ultramarine blue, but it has got some grey into it, and just painting in these transparent shadows. Make sure it's nice and light so you can see the original colour through the wash. Clean water here to blend in the top edge. And with a quick stroke you'll pick up a nice bit of dry brush. Same colour here, the French ultramarine with a little bit of grey mixed into it, and this is just to suggest perhaps a little bit of the stream has become frozen. Again, try not to make your edges look too neat. That's why a quick brush stroke will always give you these nice textured ends. A little bit of dark grey here going in wet in wet. So, now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break, and it's got to be a glass of Fuller's Winter's Ale. I might have used this one before, but you can't have too much of a good thing. Next, it's time to paint the stream, so I'm starting with my number 12 brush and completely wetting it all with clean water. Then I'm taking my ultramarine blue with that little bit of grey in it and just painting underneath the banks and the rocks. Then with my smaller number 6 brush I'm putting in a much darker value just on the bank edges here, and that'll help to give a little definition to the tops of those snow-covered rocks. Nice and dark here because we're picking up a little reflection from the tree above. Now just for a few moments I'm tilting my board to an angle of about 45 degrees just to let that paint slowly move down a bit. Next I'm lining up the trees and putting in their reflections, and you can see the paper is still damp, so I'm still getting a nice soft edge. If you think maybe it's a little too dark, just dab it out with a tissue. Back with my number 6 brush, I'm just painting in a few ripples, really trying to get those nice tapered ends. And with a quick stroke, I'm even getting some dry brush. Next, with my number 6, I'm just finishing off the fence here and putting in its reflection. And remember, I'm not using any Payne's Grey here. This is still mixes of my French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Next, I'm taking some white gouache and squeezing it into my palette. This is Titanium White by Jackman's, and then just adding a little bit of the ultramarine and the purple into the mix to make a nice light bluey purple colour. And what I'm suggesting here is just where the snow has fallen on the top of these fir trees. Now with gouache, you do have to remember that it's always going to dry that little bit darker, unlike watercolour, which always dries that little bit lighter. Now with these branches in the distance, I've just added a little more water into the mix just to make it look a little less obvious. Again, these areas here where it's slightly in shadow, I've used more water just so it's not quite so strong. And back to my brighter mix here, as we're that little bit closer to the sun. So now my gouache is dried, I'm looking at it now and feeling that the snow on the trees here just looks a little bit too obvious. Just needs to be knocked back a bit. So I'm just taking this very watery wash of cobalt blue and the purple and lightly painting over top. Obviously make sure that the gouache has totally dried. This time I'm using the gooey white gouache direct from the tube, and I'm painting in just a few highlights, and mainly it's directly below the area where the sun is. Clean water here to soften the bottom edges. Mustn't forget a few little blobs of snow on the fence posts. So now this painting is basically finished. I'm just thinking I could do with a little bit more of that yellow glow up there into my water. I just feel it's looking a little colourless down here. And there we go, all done, and this one in just nearly 3 hours. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. And try and keep it to 4 colours if you can, but a nice limited palette. And as I always say, make it your own and have fun. And in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already. It is free. Leave a comment. I do read every single one. I can't always reply to them all. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Have a great week, everyone now. Cheers.